Hello everyone, welcome to ETM 525, Leadership for Equity and Excellence. I'm Tom Riddle and I'll be the instructor for this course. Many of your names look familiar, so it's exciting to work with you again. For those of you who are new to working together with me, just a little bit about me. I am an assistant principal at South Carroll High School. I live very close to McDaniel College and I've been in education for 15 years. I've been teaching in the Equity and Excellence program for 3 or 4 years. I love this course because I think it's very exciting. I think it allows us to identify not only what goes on in our schools, but also what are our leadership roles in schools. So one of the things we have to think about is who is a leader in our school. And that's one of the things that I think you should reflect on as you're reading the major text of this book by Khalifa and Safir. A leader doesn't have to be someone with a fancy title like superintendent or principal. We have lots of different leaders in our schools, our teachers, our counselors, our maintenance staff, our students, our parents. So remember who those leaders are and continue to remind yourself of that as we go through this text, that it's not just the people with the leadership title of principal and superintendent that can be leaders for building culturally responsive schools. I think that the Khalifa text and Safir text you'll find very easy to read, but they will also challenge us to think about a lot of who we listen to, how do we listen. And I think those are important elements of identifying what makes a good leader. So let's jump into what we're going to be doing in Module 1. I think there's two pretty important questions that we answer in Module 1, or at least we start to explore. How and why are schools oppressive? And how and why do we listen? You're going to find a lot of stuff to answer this question by reading the introduction in the first 2 chapters of the Khalifa text. Make sure you take time to really get into that introduction. Don't skim over it as we most often do in introductions, because Khalifa really explains his idea of what a school-centric model is and how that school-centric model has led to pretty oppressive nature in our school systems. Khalifa also tells us that impressive structure and practices are going to continue until we as leaders challenge the status quo and we as leaders know how to properly push back against oppression. But Khalifa will also tell us that we need to really think about who we're listening to and how we're listening to them. That part of the reason that we are in the problem that we are is because for too long we have had this school-centric approach where we've only listened to the school-based side. We haven't listened to the community. We haven't taken the time to understand that the community has different perspectives, and we haven't taken time to bring that community perspective and the rich history of that community perspective into our school. We also need to realize as we're listening that different histories, different values, different identities help to build someone's understanding, and those different understandings lead to different perceptions. We can't always go with the school-centric approach. He will tell us early on about the colonization approach that we often have in schools and how we need to reflect on that and what is the impact of the community when we go into a community with that school-centric or that colony and colonization approach. In Module 1, I would start by introducing yourself in the discussion board. There's a thread just for that. Then start to read and watch the text. Again, you'll read the first chapter or 2 in both the Khalifa and the Safir text, but then there's also some articles and videos for you to dive into. Then take a second to look over the assignment for this first module. We'll look at that in a second, and then I would start to look at the discussion boards. So let's take a look at the assignment first, and then let's take a look at the discussion boards. So you should be familiar with the McDaniel Blackboard format. It does look a little bit different because they've updated Blackboard a little bit, but generally it operates the same. So the assignment for this first module is to do a little bit of self-reflection. You're going to start off by identifying a bias that exists and an inequity that exists in your school or your school system. Write a description of it. Then, interview 2 or 3 different stakeholders. Think about how you relate to those stakeholders. Interview them and write a description about how they see the bias or the inequity that's happening in your school. What is their perspective and how might it differ from yours? Then consider a list of opportunities or changes that you would make to make this inequity less impactful on your students or your staff. And then finally, describe the perfect situation. If you could do anything to make this right, there were no limitations, how would you do it? Should be about a 2 to 3 page paper, and it'll be due at the end of the module, which is June 5th. Let's take a look at the discussion boards too, real fast. Just like every other McDaniel course, there's about 2 to 3 threads in each of the discussion boards. The first one just asks you to think of what are some of the ways that you have already tried to intervene in a situation of inequity. You might not have to complete all the readings to start that off, so feel free to start that early. The second one asks you to think about what are some of the barriers, what are some of the challenges that we face as we become culturally responsive leaders, and what are the factors that we should consider when trying to be better leaders. And then the third discussion board thread asks you to think about institutionalism, how it's plaguing our schools, what's the root of that institutionalism, and how do we overcome it. Please remember the discussion boards are the major element of our class. It's how we communicate with each other. It's how we share ideas. It's also a good part of your grade. The expectation is that you will post in each of these threads at least 3 times each. So you should have at least 9 total posts in this for this first module. Your first initial post for each of the 3 threads, and then 2 follow-up posts. Remember also to post throughout the week. So get on throughout the 2-week period. Don't just post on one day. Think about your ideas, collaborate with your colleagues, and be ready to share. I'm really looking forward to this course. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. If you have any questions anytime, feel free to reach out. Hope you have a great week.